Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Emma Baum. Today's story takes us to Wales, so let's go. Sin and Tonic! Before we begin, things were slightly different this week. I had to research my case differently to how I normally do. So if I am discombobulated in any way, that is why. Because it's normally all on my phone. Today, I had to use pen and paper and not my trusty phone. So, story time. Yeah, so it's just I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna try my very best. But it's not how I usually do things. So it may feel, is it gonna be like ASMR? Also, before we begin, just quickly, a bug bit me. The sun came out and we all get really excited here in the UK when the sun comes out, and I had coffee with my friends in the garden at a coffee shop and a bug actually bit me. It's really sore and itchy on my lip. Squeak. So I'm going to do my best. It feels weird when I say try not to. And when I drink as well. Fabulous. Let's get on. Today's story takes us to a small mining village in Wales. Our story is in 2016 and is about a woman called Emma Baum. B-A-U-M. I literally feel like I'm giving a lecture because I have physical notes. It feels like all official. Stop it, Soph. Come on. Emma was a very bubbly, very happy, very friendly person, and she was very popular. This is something that came across in my research, is that she had lots of friends and she was really well liked. She was also incredibly close with her mother. They were almost described as having like a best friend relationship. And she was also incredibly into horses. I can't think of a better way to say that, but that was a passion of hers. And she then went to college to study equestrianism. Is that a word? That, horses. She would travel to go to college in England for this course in equestrianism. I'm going to just use that word. And I imagine that was probably quite difficult because she was very close with her mum, but it was also a passion of hers. You have to follow your dreams. Emma had a boyfriend, and his name is the most Welsh, stereotypical name you can think of. He is David Davies. That is so Welsh. All I could think of a lot of the time when I was reading and researching and reading all these place names and especially David Davies was Fireman Sam. That's set in Wales, isn't it? Fireman Sam. Yes, it is. And it just reminded me of that the whole way through, all the names. Fireman Sam. Sam is always cool and calm. Move aside, make way. Fireman Sam, 'cause he's gonna save the day. Fireman Sam and his brave just coming up. Sam is the hero next door. Treat. Anywho, David Davies and Emma were childhood sweethearts. So again, it must have been difficult when she then went to England to study. I had to tie my hair back, it was in my way. While studying in England, Emma fell pregnant with David Davies. So they must have obviously been meeting up in the holidays and things like that. And she fell pregnant. We all know how that happens. I'm not going to explain it. Because she was incredibly close with her mum, obviously she is with her childhood sweetheart, David Davies, and she moves back to Wales. She is a very devoted mum in the end. She loves being a mum, and things seem to be quite rosy at this point. However, things are not always as they seem, are they? And sadly, Emma and David would separate. I say sadly. It's really not, because David Davies was not a pleasant man at all. He was a very terrible person. He was dastardly, really. Before their ultimate split, Emma and David would be on and off for a while, but he can never pull himself together. He cheated on Emma. At one point she paid for a holiday for him. He went abroad. And I believe I read that she paid for that. Nice. But he then came back from this holiday, probably Magaluf or something like that, He came back from this holiday covered in love bites. Just what a douche. And it didn't seem like he was even all that arsed about, well, clearly not with all the hickeys, but he wasn't that bothered about hiding. Bothered? Where are you from, Sophie? He wasn't all that arsed about covering up. Like, he would just message other girls, and it seemed like it was quite just like he was a nasty piece of work. He wasn't nice to Emma. She would confide in her friends about how he treated her. There were also friends that came forward to say he was odd. He seemed unkind, distant, not very pleasant. So it wasn't a happy household. I believe shortly before their final separation, David had hurt Emma. He'd hit her. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, and Emma left. They would then go on to meet new partners, both of them. So David Davis had a new girlfriend, and Emma found a new fella called Nathan. And on the outside, it would seem that everything was kind of okay, and that they were co-parenting quite well. Everybody thought that Nathan was really nice, really kind, nice guy for Emma. Moving forward to the summer of 2016, at 4 a.m, the police would receive a phone call from a nearby neighbour of Emma's, and they heard an argument, shouting, then screaming, a woman screaming, and then a loud noise, like someone hitting something or whacking something really hard. That doesn't sound good, does it? Can you imagine hearing that? So they reported this to the police. The police then went out and they drove down Emma's road, this in the early hours of the morning, but they couldn't see anything. There was no disturbance. I assume they thought they were looking for domestic violence or something going on, and they did their drive along the road and there was nothing happening. So they went back to the station, and that was the end of that at that point. 6 hours later, a very unhappy and distraught David Davis would phone the police. This was about 10:30. He was there to drop off some shoes that he had of their sons. He entered the property through the back entrance, and he found the body of Emma. He then called the police, and it must have just been a very horrific scene. There was a lot of blood, and he sounds quite panicked and what's the word I'm looking for? Like in a state of shock on the phone call about what he's seeing. In his phone call to the police, he talks about the fact that she's got holes in her head. And I must admit, when I first read this, I thought that it was going to be a gun case. Shooting case. Because that's what you think of, like holes in the head. I just thought bullet holes, like had she been shot a few times in her head, which is just, whoa. Actually, it was not holes from bullet holes. Anyway, we'll get to that. But he then called her mum. He called Emma's mum, who then arrived at the scene. She arrived before ambulance and police to her daughter in this horrific state and quite obviously passed away. Despite that, and I think she just continued to do CPR until the ambulance and the police arrived. She was pronounced dead at the scene. This would then be the beginning of the murder inquiry, because it was quite obvious that Emma had been murdered. You couldn't do that to yourself, and it wasn't an accident, as she had a lot of holes in her head. Her body was in her back garden, so that's where David found her. He'd gone in through the back gate and into the back garden, and that's where he had found Emma's body. And quite quickly, in this small, quiet mining village, like very stereotypical, picturesque, beautiful Welsh village, chaos just ensued, and there was a lot of police presence on that road. Quite quickly, the police and the investigators, they put the time of Emma's death at around 4 a.m. because not only, when they started their inquiries, they then realised that other people had heard this commotion at 4 a.m. So somebody had called it in, the police had gone up and down the road, nothing to see here, gone off. But other people, when they were interviewed in the street, had heard noise at 4 a.m. Somebody had seen a man run down the alley that ran behind Emma's house, but they couldn't, it was dark, so they wouldn't be able to identify somebody. Itchy eye. And also, now this is interesting, somebody heard a woman shouting, "Nathan." Ooh, new boyfriend is called Nathan. What's occurring? I've just said that and I'm thinking, there's a Welsh woman in a show. Oh my God, it's famous. I didn't watch it really. Don't come for me. But I didn't. And I think she goes, "What's occurring?" That was awful. What is it? James Corden was in it. Oh, it's gone. I've got to Google it because it's going to do my nut. She's called Nessa. Gavin and Stacey. There we go. I only really watched it at Christmas, the Christmas specials. Again, don't come for me. I feel like it's really popular and I'm just like, I've only watched it once or twice, sorry. There was also no forced entry into the property, so this would suggest that Emma knew her killer, and the hunt for Nathan would then begin. They needed to find this guy. They discovered that he lived about 10 miles away with his parents, so they headed there, quick sharp. ASMR ready, I'm going to turn the page. Oh, it's a nice thick page. Oh, what do you know? Nathan was not at home. So the hunt for Nathan would continue. It wouldn't last very long. They found Nathan later on that day and took him in to be questioned. The police, at this point, when they had Nathan, they told reporters that they were not looking for anybody else in conjunction with Emma's murder. Now that just basically is saying, we think we've got our guy. So it seemed pretty certain that Nathan was Emma's killer, and her friends and family just could not believe it. They could not believe that it was Nathan. Friends and family were much more suspicious of David Davies. Now this guy, like we've heard, has not been a good boyfriend, he's not been kind, he's actually hit Emma, he has been nasty, horrible, spiteful. And furthermore, in the months leading up to Emma's murder, he had upped his ante. This was not an amicable split or situation, not at all. Maybe they were co-parenting okay, but he was not a happy bunny. He had been stalking Emma. He had stolen her dog. So in the May of 2016, he'd stolen her dog. She reported this to the police. Not only was he stalking her, walking past the house, wanting to know who she was with, where she was. I mean, he's got his own girlfriend. Move on. No, this behaviour in itself is not great. But he also did threaten Emma's life, and she even spoke to friends and family about the fact that he would kill her one day, despite her family and friends having these concerns, talking to the police, giving their interviews, really pointing the finger at David Davies and saying, look at this guy. Despite all of that, David Davies had an alibi, and what can you do? Perhaps her family and friends just didn't know enough about Nathan, and this guy was a bad chap as well. Emma's autopsy, it just, to be honest, is grisly. It was determined that Emma was beaten around the head and she had over 20 wounds, and they were consistent with a crowbar. A freaking crowbar. I don't think I have covered a case where someone's been murdered with a crowbar yet. I don't believe. Let me know if I'm wrong. The autopsy also showed that it was a lot of rage. This wasn't like a burglary gone wrong. Someone came in, oh gosh, and bopped her on the head. No, this was rage. This was somebody that knew Emma and had strong feelings for Emma. And then, just like that, Nathan had an alibi. Well, so The guy that they 100%, they were like, yep, we got him, we know him. Someone was shouting his name, a man ran down the alley, the person knew Emma, there was no forced entry. Someone shouted his freaking name. Do you know what I mean? Like at 4 a.m, Nathan, do you know? Okay. And he had an absolute solid alibi. He was at some festival or something of that description that night, and there were just numerous witnesses that he was there at that time. He was there all night. He woke up there. There was no way that he could have committed the murder. So Nathan was then let free. There's nothing else they can do. He had a solid alibi. David Davis has an alibi. So what the hell? But let's have a little look at David Davis's alibi, because when I read it, I can't believe that it was ever called an alibi. Okay? I know this is not real, but like in Midsummer Murders or any police show, they're like, was the person ever out of your sight? Was there a window? And the amount of times that the alibi, they're like, there was actually an hour's window. Ooh, where they weren't there. All this business. What? Oh, vain. David said, and this was his alibi, David said that he was at his girlfriend's, fabulous, with his girlfriend, and then she went to bed, her, and she was like, yep, that's all right. And he stayed up playing the Xbox until 4 a.m. Just like hours of the evening where you weren't together, you could have fucked off and done anything. How is that an alibi? It's not, is it? Annoyed me. He said he did get a text from Emma that very evening, asking for their son's shoes. Could he drop off his shoes the next day? Yeah, sure thing. And then off he goes to bed at 4 a.m. And then in the early hours, so like after having, an hour's kip or something, 1 hour or two, 6 in the morning or some crap, they got up and went on a dog walk. This is just bizarre. It's like, what? So they took their dog for a walk and then they returned home, I don't know, had a bowl of Cheerios or whatever, and then he drove over to Emma's. So at about 10 o'clock he texted Emma to say, on my way with the shoes, and then he arrived about 10:30 to discover Emma's body. Now, what a crock of shit. Fabulously, the minute Nathan's alibi checked out, the police arrested David Davies and his girlfriend. Maybe I'm being very unfair, and the police weren't really taking his alibi seriously, but they just needed to discount Nathan. David stuck to his story, his alibi, and yeah, he said what he'd said. But the police then, they did what they do best, and they started to have a look into everything, and they used the old phone situation. So where was his phone? At around 2 a.m. Probably was having a game on his Xbox. And then the mood struck him to jump in his car and head over to... Not only did the police look at where Trevor's phone was, they also wanted to nail him. So they looked at Emma's actual router, her Wi-Fi router, to see, and his phone, to see if they had connected. So he'd have to be pretty close for that to happen. And at 2:30 in the morning, his phone connected to Emma's router, to Emma's Wi-Fi. So he was either in the house or incredibly close to it, close enough to pick up her router. Not only that, Sonny Jim, so he was seen on CCTV as well. How do you explain that, mate? Well, he didn't. He did not. He just at that point said no comment, like they always do. His girlfriend's charges were dropped. My brain is just trying to think about that. So what could she have been charged with? Perverting the course of justice? Did they think she'd lied? I don't know. Because she wasn't with him. So she said she went to bed, which is probably true, and she probably didn't know anything had happened, actually, or she had suspicions, but she didn't know. And then, as far as she knows, she wakes up and they go on an early morning dog walk. So, yeah. So she all of her charges were dropped. Now, it's that dog walk that got the police thinking, because at this point in the case, although they have evidence enough to charge David Davis, they don't have the murder weapon, and they really want to find this crowbar. So they decide to have a little butcher's at this place where he walked his dog in the early hours of the morning. I say early hours, 6 o'clock is probably not classed as early hours, but it is to me. So they head there, and there was an extensive search for this crowbar, and it's so frustrating because his girlfriend, when she was questioned again, probably scared half to death, she said, look, he did leave my side, actually. We were on this dog walk, and then all of a sudden he said he needed to go and get something from the car. Let's not forget, this is a really cruel and horrible man. He told her to wait where she was, so she probably frickin' did. And he went back to the car, and then she said he was gone and out of her sight for about 5 minutes. So with that in mind, knowing where she was standing and where the car was, they could base their search for this crowbar. They strongly believed that he went and got this crowbar out of the boot or out of the car and then dumped it somewhere on this dog walk. But they just couldn't find it, and they never did find it, and it's really frustrating. ASMR. Easy target. Also, how lush is that notebook? Peekaboo. Leopards. David Davies is charged with Emma's murder. They have enough evidence even without the murder weapon. And a court date is set and all of this, and then just before the court date, he changes his mind, change of heart, and he decides to plead guilty. Kind of. He pleads guilty to her murder, but he denies premeditated murder. Oh, it's just so frustrating. Anyway, so he claims that he was driving past her house, like you do, at 2:30 in the frickin' morning, and he saw that her lights were on, so he thought he'd go and have a little chat, and when they were having a chat, it turned to an argument, and she hit him, and he saw the crowbar, and he grabbed it, and then he blacked out. Oh, he blacked out. Original. Now, his lawyers would have said to him, you make sure that you say that crowbar was already at the property, because if he'd have taken a crowbar with him, that would just prove premeditation, because he's taken a weapon to this chat. So he claimed that the crowbar was at the property already, because he had been there the week before dismantling a shed. That may be true, we don't know. What actually happened is likely far more sinister and disturbing. Friends and family would say that when Emma moved on herself and she met somebody else, Nathan, he just couldn't handle it. David was not in control anymore. He'd lost control, and his behaviour in the months towards the end of Emma's life was just spiralling out of control. The stalking, the death threats, stealing her dog. Sadly, Emma had reported these incidents 3 times. There were 3 incidents that she reported to the police, and there was an investigation later on into whether they were handled correctly, and it led to more training within the police force and things like that, because it didn't really seem like much had happened when she had contacted the police to say what was going on. A lot of the time it was just put down to like a civil dispute. Nothing came of it ultimately. And sadly, I'm now telling the story of the worst case scenario in these situations. Somehow, David managed to get Emma to come downstairs and open the back door, and he attacked her with a crowbar. She was just attacked at her back door, and he then left her body in the back garden. And this just made my blood run cold. But he attacked Emma at 2:30, between 2:30 and 4 o'clock, probably 4 o'clock, because that's when the neighbours heard all the commotion. So at 2:30, I'm not sure what he was doing. He was either in her house or very close to it because his phone connected to the Wi-Fi. We don't know. We will never know. However, at 4 a.m, he horrifically murdered Emma in her own back garden. And then he left, knowing that his 2-year-old son, only 2, a baby, was upstairs asleep. Now, if you've got kids, what if they have a bad dream? It just broke my heart for the kid, because also, what if all of that, if neighbours woke up to this noise and heard all of that going on, the screaming and the shouting, what if their baby woke up? So I dread to think, I really hope he just slept through it. But ultimately, nobody was then with his son until 10:30 the next day. He knowingly murdered Emma and then left their baby there alone until 10:30 the next day. I know it's disgusting murdering someone, but what a vile piece of shit. The judge believed that David had taken the crowbar with him to the property, but that he'd taken it with him just to threaten Emma. How could he know? I don't know, I wasn't there. But that's what he thought, that, that's what had happened, and then he'd ended up ferociously attacking her. It wasn't just like a mistake, was it? Oh gosh, sorry, I hit you once. He over 20 wounds. Anyhow, he was sentenced to a minimum of 22 years in prison. In my opinion, he should have got 22 more on top, because he left his baby there with his dead mother. Arse. That is all I have for you on today's story. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I do hope you can join me next week for another true crime story, and a glass or a mug or a vase or a goblet of gin. I'm going to try and sneak in some different vessels. Love you. See you next week. Bye!